My guest today is Brittany Young, a dynamic professional with an illustrious 15-year career in the pharmaceutical industry. She's worked with CEOs, top executives, and closed multi-million-dollar sales deals. Today, Brittany's passion and purpose have taken her beyond the corporate realm. She's an esteemed executive sales coach, exclusively focused on female CEOs by using her method, the permission process. However, her life was not always as it appears today. In today's episode, we talk about Brittany's struggle with addiction and how her sobriety has allowed her to understand how to successfully navigate the highs and lows of one's personal and professional life. Welcome to Lifeology.
Thank you for having me here today, James. I really appreciate it.
I am looking forward to this. We have a mutual friend, Corey Poirier. Corey's been on my show many times. He is a fantastic person. So if you want to be on a TEDx or have a TEDx talk and aren't able to get on that, Corey's the best person to talk to. So go to bluetalks.com, that's BLUtalks.com, and tell him that I sent you, James Miller. Now, Brittany, you have worked with him before. And so when he connected us, I looked at your story and I was like, yes, I would love for you to be on my show. And now, one thing I didn't realize, though, was the whole aspect of the sobriety part. And we'll get to that in a minute. But you started out, not going to say started out, but your career is in pharmaceutical sales. What was the specific pharmaceutical that you sold?
So that's a great question. I worked on a few campaigns, actually, both generic as well as brands. And one of the products that I was on was an MS drug. And that MS drug actually was one of the first MS drugs that came onto market. And the company that I worked for, they marketed it very well. And so it was very easy to sell. And it's still on the market. And now it's in its generic form, which is really nice. Yeah. So the price went down and things like that. But,
yeah, of course.
Yeah.
That's awesome. It's cool when you can, obviously all pharmaceuticals, for the most part, we really appreciate the results of that. But, it's great when it's something, a brand new drug that can help people as well. Back in my clinical years, when I worked in hospitals in my private practice, I would go to all those pharmaceutical dinners back when it was a little too lavish at times, but it was really nice at that time. I look back at that fondly. I learned a lot and I enjoyed the dinners as well. So when I saw that, I'm like, I do remember those days. Now for you, how did you transition from pharmaceutical sales into the executive sales coach that you are today?
Well, I worked in oil and gas after I got out of pharmaceuticals, and it just didn't fit me, my personality. I was one of very few women in that industry, and it was just really hard to break through. And in 2017, the company actually decided to lay off 40% of the company itself because they were deciding to divest all of their assets, and it made sense for them to let go of the salespeople. Yeah. And I had a choice to either stay in corporate or start my own business. And actually a client of mine wanted to hire me, and I decided, hey, this is great. Thank you for the opportunity, but I'm going to try out what it looks like to start something on my own. So I did. I started my company in 2017. I actually started out in fitness, and I started training men and women in the recovery industry when they got out of rehab. And then I moved into, believe it or not, psychiatric hospitals, and I was training psych patients and helping them move their body very simply, whether it was, squatting, walking, things of that nature. And then I met my husband, and we started having these really transformational, powerful conversations around business. And he said, what would it look like if you went back into some sort of business role and did some sort of consulting? And I thought, not only would that probably pay for our wedding and our future, but what would that look like? So I started taking on corporate clients. I started taking on individuals who really needed sales help and sales training. And that began in 2018. And so I've been doing my work now ever since then. And it's definitely transformed me as a business owner. And now specifically being able to help women business owners and their teams, master the sales process, 10x their revenue, 10x their sales.
I saw that.
Feel like, hey, I'm really confident in this. I can trust myself. I know exactly what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. and we're getting out of what I like to call the old way of selling or the old man model way of
Mm-hmm.
selling in what I learned in the pharmaceutical industry and putting the power back in their hands.
Mm.
Yeah.
Congratulations. I want to go back to
Thank
the
you.
time when you had the opportunity, when you were laid off, unfortunately, and then that client came to you and said they wanted to hire you. You had to make a choice. Do you go with this client
Mhm.
with what you knew, or do you strike it on your own?
Right.
What was it like for you to sit there with those two choices? Because one is quote easy because of what you know, and the other one is somewhat unknown for you. How did you make that decision?
Well, I think, James, my whole life has been let's travel the harder road. Let's figure it
By
out the
choice or
hard
not?
way
I'm just kidding.
by choice or not. And when given the choice, I was up for the challenge. And so it only took me about 24 hours to say thanks, but no
Hmm.
thanks. But one of the things that really struck me when I had that conversation with him
Hmm.
was he took a pause, he took a breath, and then he said to me, I'm really proud of you. And believe it or not, my own daughter left hospital nursing and began her own travel business. And she travels around the country helping other nurses start a travel business. And I
Wow.
think you're going to be just fine figuring it
Hmm.
out on your own. If you need anything, stay in touch. And that really gave me the first leg
Yeah.
up of making the decision
Mhm.
that, yeah, I get to make this choice, but it's a really powerful one.
Yes, yes, it is. And I'm really glad that, I mean, it sounds like a wonderful person, a kind person, your client, to be able to give you that ability to, offer you the position, but then also to turn around and also just to praise you and to really compliment you in a way that helped bolster your confidence as well. It's
Yeah.
interesting. We all have those moments, those pivotal moments. May not realize it at the time, but reflect when we look back retrospectively. In other words, when we look in the past, like, wow, that was a really pivotal moment in my life. I could make a choice. My life would be very different had I gone a different path. And so, if we like who we are today, then the great things we've been through and the things we don't like about ourselves, if we hadn't gone through those specific things, we would not be the person we are today. So it's really important to kind of look at that. Of course, you do as well. Look at that as far as understanding how it all works together. We may not like the event we experienced, but once again, when it all comes together, this is who we are today.
Hmm.
I would like, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to go maybe talk a little more about your personal life. So we were talking about
Sure.
sobriety as well. Do you want to talk a little bit about what your struggles were and how you overcame it?
Sure. So I'm a recovering alcoholic. I've been in recovery now for 10 and a half years. Um,
Congratulations.
Thank you. A lot of that is due to God and
Mm-hmm.
surrendering to Him and His power.
Mm-hmm.
But I started drinking when I was 17, and I was unfortunately sexually assaulted by my then friend at that time, who basically told me, "Keep this quiet. What happened is not something that needs to be spoken of." And so I held that pain in, and the only way I knew was to numb that pain with
Mm-hmm.
alcohol and drugs.
Mm-hmm.
And so, unfortunately, my drinking career lasted about 10 years. It ended a lot of friendships. It ended a lot of family relationships. It got me fired from my very first corporate
Mm-hmm.
job, that pharmaceutical company that I was at, because I was showing up either hungover or drunk, because I could not get a hold on it
Mm-hmm.
like
Yeah.
most
Yeah.
alcoholics,
Yeah.
and I knew that I needed help. And so my way of getting sober is not the traditional rehab way of getting sober,
Mm-hmm.
but I actually decided to go to a CrossFit gym. And
Oh,
that's
wow.
the
Nice.
way that I got sober, was lifting heavy weights, um, going home and getting sick, and showing up the next day and doing it all over again because I like pain. And, you know, when I walked into that CrossFit gym that day that I made the decision to get sober, the gentleman at the front desk looked at me and I said, "Hey, I might get sick here. I don't know what this is going to look like, feel like." And he
Mm.
started laughing. And I said, "What's so funny?" And he goes, "Well, I've been sober for 5 years, and you're in the right place. And if I can do it, so can you. Come on
Wow.
into the gym." Yeah.
Wow. I mean, once again, we're led and directed in so many different ways. And obviously if we're open to it. And so for whatever reason, you were led to that gym and, you talked about your connection with God and it sounds, that all the serendipitous moments, in other words, those fortuitous moments, those divine moments that come together offer us something. And first off, thank you so much for sharing this story. I mean, about the sexual assault, I know I can't imagine what that feels like. I was not in your position, but I appreciate your being forthcoming about how it was the impetus for you to become, to transition to multiple things in your life. When when we experience something, we for example, all that pain you were experiencing, we always want to self-soothe. So self-soothing behaviors can look like they can appear in many different ways, healthy or unhealthy. So self-soothing behaviors come from our five senses. So our sense of sight, our sense of hearing, sense of touch, smell, taste, etc. And so in that, you wanted to numb the pain. So of course you're going to drink, you're going to use alcohol to do that. So it was a self-soothing behavior. So you soothe yourself from the pain, but in that it took on a life of its own. And so oftentimes people can have very healthy self-soothing behaviors and sometimes unhealthy versions of that. So it's important for us to understand when we're feeling something, and I'm just explaining this to my audience, when we feel something, what do we do? And so it's important to link together our normal response with, why am I doing this? What do I feel and why am I doing this? For example, if people overeat, recognizing the emotional state they're in prior to eating or binge eating, and they'll understand the connection between that. Or perhaps watching pornography. How are you feeling before that? If you're looking to change your brain chemistry, you're going to watch something. So everything comes from your sense of whatever your five senses are. So for you, it's kind of cool though, because you then took your self-soothing behavior from the quote unhealthy version from the alcoholism and moved it towards physical touch, which is the CrossFit aspect of it. Mm-hmm. So you moved from one sense to another, from taste to your sense of touch. And in that, you were able to overcome it and then continue to work through that. And so I always think it's really interesting when we think about our self-soothing behaviors, what are the healthy versions and what are the unhealthy versions of it? And how do we make sure that they move towards the healthier version of it, overall? But once again, I wanted to go back to the whole aspect of your story. So as you work through all those things, you became this executive coach. When you look today, when I'm the person I'm talking with now, what's different and what's the same about that person who walked into the CrossFit gym and the person today?
Today, I am emotionally regulated. My nervous system is stable. I had a lot of anger at the beginning of my recovery journey, and that is not affecting me anymore. I'm also a mom. I'm married. I have a successful business. And back then, you couldn't tell me anything. I was on a war path to figuring out just sobriety. And now my mind, my body, my spirit, everything is open in a good way. And when I'm working with clients, one of the biggest things that you just touched on was the emotional aspect of why we do what we do. So self-awareness. And I did not have self-awareness 10 and a half years ago. And I can honestly say today that that is one of the biggest reasons why I continue to show up, why I continue to wake up. That is my why. My why is to make sure that other women, other people deserve to have that self-awareness on such a pivotal level. And that self-awareness begins to create opportunities in your life so that when you do show up for the big promotion or, the large contract that you're about to sign, that you don't self-sabotage yourself because you know what's really going on emotionally. You're really aware. You're in touch with your body. You're in touch with your mind. And the two are not actually on different pages. They're working together. Yeah.
I really appreciate everything you said there, and I've not heard someone say that before. I've had hundreds of shows, and I've never heard someone talk about the self introspection component of it. When you look back at that person, though, I'm sure at that time she thought she was very self aware. Often we have this idea of what self awareness is. We're like on top of my game. You're meeting all your sales quotas, and I'm sure there's that version. And then once again, years later, or however much time in the future, we look back, we're like, wow, was not self-awareness at all. When you talk about self-awareness, how do you help your clients recognize self-awareness? And then I'll piggyback off that up from the psychological aspect of it.
think the very first thing that we dive into is, really that core wound that keeps
Hmm.
coming up over and over. I
Yeah.
find that a lot of my ladies come to me with a lot of anger and frustration. So the person that I used to be, because they want to make the sales, they want to help their
Hmm.
team. So that anger and frustration, it's pouring out of them. But at the root cause level, and when we really get down to it and using certain tools like nervous system regulation, somatic
Hmm. Hmm.
healing,
Hmm.
I'm not a therapist, but trained in NLP, trained in somatics,
Hmm.
being able to use these tools to really figure out what is that root cause issue. And what's really interesting is it's abandonment,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
fear. And
Yeah.
that fear is psychologically driving them to show up the way that they are in their life, in their relationships, in their
Mhm.
business, and it could actually hurt you rather than help you.
Yeah.
And so my job is that self-awareness is very key in order for you then to create the sales that you want. Because if we don't become introspective and we don't have that awareness, we're going to keep repeating the same patterns over and over, and we're not going to achieve the results that we want.
Yeah. Well said. For those who don't know what NLP is, it's neuro-linguistic programming. It's a certain type of methodology that can help people with figure things out. When so with everything you said, obviously I confirm that. That doesn't mean that I have to confirm it, but I agree with you with what you're saying. When it comes to the whole aspect of when we are kids, often we understand the world around us, either what people have told us, what we've internalized by different events. And so what happens is whatever pivotal times in our life creates our core belief. So core belief is something you believe at the end of the day. That's at the true core of who you are. And you'll recognize what that is if you do something that embarrasses you, that you're really angry about. Whatever you say to yourself, I'm so stupid, you're so dumb, you always do this. Whatever that sentence is really your core belief. And so sometimes when we think we have a great life, and I'm sure we do. And when we really stop and think with that self-awareness you're talking about, you'll hear whatever that sentence is, which really identifies the true core belief you have about yourself. And in that core belief, that becomes a foundation for how we see everything. So we can build a wonderful career, but that core belief is always going to be at the foundational piece of it that will always wound a person. And so when we go through life, that perception is going to then influence how we see things. You were talking about the anger that a lot of these women experience. So anger is a primary emotion. So one of the six
Mm-hmm.
emotions, primary emotions. But when there's nothing to be angry about, so anger is a defensive. There's action behind it.
Right.
So if there's nothing to be angry about per se, if you don't know how to defend yourself, well, then it's used as a secondary emotion, which means it's there to protect us from something else. So what it does, it protects those more vulnerable emotions, those the abandonments, the fear, the rejection, all of that is right there. So if we are experiencing anger, and when we think about it, we're like, well, I'm not in danger. I don't have to be protected. If you have that self-awareness to look within yourself, it's probably one of those things we're talking about: the abandonment, the fear, the loneliness, the rejection. And so in that, it's important to kind of understand that. So for you to be able to help them recognize that is so powerful. And the whole aspect of you talking about the nervous system, many people don't realize how powerful that is. Usually nervous system really deals with, when it comes to attachment theory, when you have the three
Mm-hmm.
different or four different versions of attachment: the secure, anxious avoidant, or fearful avoidant, and the avoidant in general. And so that really comes from the nervous system of when we're kids. As far as when we're activated, all of a sudden our nervous system kicks in, and all of a sudden we remove ourselves or do something that demonstrates that attachment style, which then all of a sudden sabotages us as well. That's a whole other show. But I wanted to really, I guess, jump on that because I'm excited to hear about how you help them as well. So what you've seen as far as your results thus far is to help them understand this. And then when they have that awareness, you're able to then translate that to their sales, which you said you've been able to magnify that 10 times, I guess 10 times what their sales quota is.
So yeah, 2013, my clients made roughly
Congratulations.
over $6 million,
It's
and
amazing. Absolutely amazing.
it's it it really is because of this regulation that when you're experiencing these certain emotions, when you really are able to regulate yourself and channel that energy back into your business, channel that energy
Mhm.
back into your marriage or your children, and of course yourself,
Mm.
you're going to see the results. And usually it's going
Yeah.
to show up in your sales or, in your relationship.
Yeah.
One of the things that I often see with clients is they begin speaking up for themselves. They begin learning how to say no. They really understand what it means to believe that they have what other people need. They don't question their worth, and they don't feel they need to prove themselves any longer to
Mm.
anybody else, which is really, really powerful. Yeah.
That comes back to the self advocacy part of it. Many times when we do feel rejected, we forget that we have the ability to self advocate. We have the ability to say no. We have that ability to set boundaries. And as we know, boundaries keep us safe. And we use those boundaries when people do something that is not healthy for us. And so that's great that they're able to find their voice. Many times people forget, especially if the core belief is that they don't matter, they're not important, or there's no value to them. Of course, they're not, a person like that is not going to feel like they can say no. So for you to be able to teach them how to say no, how to set their boundaries, I can imagine how great or how much their business would thrive, because there's a balance within themselves, the ability to have that self-awareness to recognize when they're self-sabotage or about to self-sabotage or self-sabotage, or just recognize how they're showing up. And in that authenticity allows a person to truly shine, because they
Mm-hmm.
accept all versions of themselves. Sometimes we cherry pick and
Exactly.
say, this isn't who I am. Well, that's who you are, but it's also this part here as well. So where there's light, there's darkness. Where there's darkness, there's light. So in that whole aspect, when we accept all of who we are, that person who struggles with saying no, the person who has this negative core belief, and this person who's very successful, when you truly accept all of that, that's how you show up, and then you can work on everything, every aspect of your life. But without that awareness, as we talked about initially, we can't even start, because we're just living almost like living paycheck to paycheck. We're not realizing that we can have abundance in our life and not necessarily just live it by moment and not understand what is happening around us.
Yeah, and that's why I created the permission process, because it is about giving oneself permission to sell the way that you want, but also to accept every single one of those versions of who you are being.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of women get confused on what doing versus being is. And so,
Mm,
giving yourself actual permission to be, because you don't always
yes.
have to be in the doing. We're not human doers, we're
Yes.
human beings for a reason.
No, that's neat. I've never heard that before. That's nice. I like that. I like that as well. I'm sure, working with so many people and seeing the results, that has to feel really good for you. And obviously you don't do it for that, but there is always a byproduct when we give out to others, and we do it authentically. There is that byproduct of us experiencing that as well. As you work with these people, what have you learned more about yourself throughout these years?
I would say the number one thing that I've learned is patience.
Mm, I struggle with
um,
that.
I have a toddler, so I feel like if I don't have patience, then, um, but there are other things that I've learned. And besides patience, I would say that I have a really big heart, and
Mm,
that heart cares very deeply for me, for myself, first and foremost.
yes.
And so I have learned that I get to say no just as much as I get to say yes. Um, that I am loved by others, but more importantly, by myself and by God. And I will never give up on my own heart. No matter what the challenge is, I will continue to be resilient. I will continue to speak the truth, even if it hurts. And I will continue showing up on purpose, in authentic expression, unapologetically, because that's my gift. And if I can give myself permission to bring those gifts to others, then they can give themselves permission to sell the way that they want and make the money that they want to.
Wow, truly inspirational. I really appreciate that. You're right. It is a gift, and you're able to share that with others, which then unlocks that within themselves, that resilience and that ability to self advocate, and from that they are able to grow in as well and spread that light also to other people. Unfortunately, our time is up. I would love to talk more with you, but our time is up. If my viewers and listeners want to find out more information about you, Brittany, and to work with you to learn everything you're doing, where will they find all this information online?
Sure. So check me out on LinkedIn. That's where I'm most popular now, as well as my website, which is Brittany. youngwealth.com. First name Brittany.
Excellent. My viewers and listeners also note that if they can't find this information any other place, simply go to the show notes at jamesmillerlifeology.com. I have all of Brittany's information there, as well as her LinkedIn profile that you can click on that as well. Brittany, thank you so much. I truly appreciate all your time and wisdom. I had a wonderful time today. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. I really appreciate it.